Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the damp cottages and crowded villages of medieval Europe, where the Black Death wasn't a distant calamity, but a daily nightmare of fever and fear. Forget the noble houses and courtly banquets you hear about in history books. The real struggle was in mud-choked lanes, over empty granaries, and beside the hearth where disease ravaged families faster than any army. So tonight we're asking how ordinary peasants survived the Black Death, and what it really took to eke out life when death stalked every settlement. Every village faced its own horrors, so let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, settle in, and let's step into the world of medieval peasants together. You wake at dawn to the low bleat of sheep in the pasture, and the glow of sky pale with first light. Your grandmother stands at the cottage door, with a woven basket in hand. She tugs your sleeve and points toward the hedgerow. Today, you will learn the names and uses of plants that can ease fever and slow the plague's cruel march. You follow her under hawthorn branches heavy with berries. The air is damp and smells of earth and early flowers. Your grandmother carries a small knife and a cloth bundle. She teaches you to move quietly so birds do not scatter, and so you can hear the soft rustle of leaves. You will need all senses sharp to find the right herbs. The first plant she shows you is yarrow. Its flat clusters of white blossoms sit atop tall, slender stems. You learn that yarrow's bitter leaves help bring down fever and stop bleeding. Your grandmother instructs you to pinch a leaf and rub it between thumb and forefinger. The scent is sharp and astringent. You place a few fresh leaves in the basket. Next, she leads you to a patch of feverfew growing wild beside a muddy ditch. Its small, daisy-like flowers close as the dew dries in the sun. You learn that boiling a handful of feverfew in water makes a tea you can sip to calm shivering and headache. You pick the blossoms gently so the plant continues to thrive. As you move deeper into the hedgerow, you spot jewel-like blackberries and leave them for another day. Your grandmother points to a low green plant with serrated leaves. This is ground ivy, she says. You learn that ground ivy can ease cough and soothe lung pain. You twist a stem free and let its minty fragrance fill your nose. With each plant, you learn its name and its healing power. Chickweed for skin sores, plantain to draw out toxins from a wound, stinging nettle boiled into a broth rich in vitamins. You gather small bunches, careful not to take more than you need. You learn that the hedge is your medicine chest, but also a living ecosystem you must respect. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth makes you pause. A small hare darts across your path and disappears into brambles. You learn that nature gives life and takes life in turn. The same hand that can prick you with nettle sting can also tender young leaves that feed your remedy. You return to the cottage by midday with basket lined in linen. The kitchen fire is low and the air smells of yesterday's stew. Your grandmother stretches out a clean cloth on the table and spreads the plants. She sorts them by use. Fever reduces in one pile, poultices in another. You learn that organization stops mistakes when lives hang in the balance. She lights a small fire under a black pot and fills it with water drawn from the well. She adds yarrow and feverfew to make a bitter tea. Sip slowly, she says. You taste warmth and a slight burn on your tongue. You learn that the best medicines taste sharp or bitter but bring relief afterward. While the herbs brew, she places plantain leaves over a raw scratch on your arm. You feel coolness spread as the leaf sap seeps into your skin. You learn that some plants treat wounds better than any leather or cloth. Your grandmother dries other herbs over the fire in a clay dish. Once brittle, you crush them with a mortar and pestle into powders you can mix with vinegar to make a wash. You learn that preserving herbs lets you draw on them in winter when the hedgerows sleep. As evening falls, you sip the herbal tea and feel warmth spread through your chest. Shivers fade, and you rest against the wall. You learn that gathering herbs is as much about careful study as about brute strength. Knowledge passed from hand to hand protects the weak and the sick. Your grandmother tucks the last dried herbs into little pouches. She hangs them by the hearth so they stay dry. She smiles at you and ruffles your hair. You learn that in these pouches lie hope and comfort when plague knocks at the door. When darkness deepens, you lie on the straw pallet by the hearth and inhale the lingering scent of herbs. You dream of green fields and white blossoms. You learn that in the world beyond your cottage, the Black Death may rage, but here you hold tools to fight it one leaf at a time. You kneel beside the low green plant with serrated leaves that your grandmother has pointed out. She says this is plantain. You learn that crushing a few leaves to extract their juices makes a soothing poultice for insect bites and swelling. She shows you how to roll a leaf between your palms until the juices seep through the fibers, and then how to press it gently onto a small scratch on your hand. The cooling sensation stings at first, but then eases the itch and soreness. You tuck a handful of leaves into your basket, careful not to tear the plant's roots. A little further on, she stops by a cluster of tall stems topped with feathery blooms of pale green. Nettle, she says, for blood purifying. You learn that young nettle leaves contain iron and help cleanse the blood, which peasants believed could help ward off the plague's poison. She shows you how to grasp the stem with a cloth so that the stinging hairs cannot break your skin. You use your folded apron as protection to pinch the leaves free and drop them into the basket. You learn respect for the nettle's sting and for the strength it lends. You move on to a glade of elder trees. Their umbrella-shaped clusters of ivory flowers perfume the air with a honeyed scent. You learn that elderflower tea brings down fever and eases lung congestion. Your grandmother slices a bloom from the stalk and chews it briefly, letting the sweetness linger before dropping the blossom into her basket. She warns not to take the berries green, but to wait until they ripen and turn deep purple, when they can be boiled into syrups and wines that strengthen the body. Below the elder, you spot a creeping vine with rounded leaves and tiny purple flowers. Ground ivy, she whispers. You learn that the decoction of its leaves eases coughs and helps clear lungs. She plucks a sprig, brushing the delicate flowers between her fingers to revive their aroma. You tuck them into a cloth bundle to keep the petals from bruising. Next comes a patch of mint, its glossy leaves shining in the morning sun. You learn that mint tea eases nausea and settles the stomach when fevers churn the gut. Your grandmother shows you how to snap a tip of the stem just below a node so that the plant will continue to grow. You gather a small bunch, inhaling the cool, refreshing scent that fills your nostrils. At the edge of the clearing, you find a circle of violet flowers with sweet faces turned to the sky. Violet is prized for soothing sore throats and relieving head pain. You learn to strip the petals gently, careful not to crush them, and to fold them into parchment for drying over the hearth. Your grandmother demonstrates how to layer petals between clean sheets so they will air dry without browning. Moving on, you spy a tall plant with clusters of purple bluebells. This is lungwort. You learn that its spotted leaves mistakenly suggest lungs, so peasants use it in infusions to treat coughs and chest tightness. Your grandmother breaks a leaf and sniffs it, nodding at the mildly earthy aroma. She trims the leaves close to the ground and explains that the plant will sprout again, soon, ready for the next harvest. Deeper in the hedgerow, you uncover rampions, the root of which makes a bitter tonic to stir circulation and break fevers. You dig with a small knife around the base of the stalk and lift a pale root into your hand. You taste a sliver of raw root to test its intensity and feel a tingle on your tongue. You learn that peasants boiled the root in water, then strained it into cups to lend strength during long illnesses. Finding a low mat of creeping thyme, you pluck a few sprigs and crush them between your fingers. A warm, lingering aroma fills the air. You learn that thyme is a powerful antiseptic. When boiled into water, it makes a steam inhalation that opens airways and kills germs on the skin. Your grandmother wraps a bundle of thyme in cloth to use later for compresses. Before you leave the hedgerow, your grandmother guides you to a stand of comfrey. Its thick leaves look bumpy like the knuckles of a burly hand. You learn that comfrey poultices bind broken bones and soothe deep wounds. She tears a leaf and grinds it between her hands, forming a soft green paste. She applies it to your earlier burn and wraps it in linen. You learn that comfrey must be used sparingly, for its healing power can be overwhelming if misused. With your basket full, you pause at the hedgerow's mouth. Your grandmother takes a reed and marks several spots on the sticky sap that drips from the hawthorn. Keep these in mind for November, she says. You learn that fluid from oak and hawthorn bark, boiled into decoction, serves as a powerful astringent against bleeding and diarrhea. Mapping the locations ensures you can return in the colder months when fresh herbs grow scarce. Back at the cottage, she spreads a clean cloth on a low table and begins sorting the herbs. She arranges yarrow, nettle, and plantain leaves in one pile, the flowers of elder, ground ivy, and violet in another, and the roots and tougher sprigs in a third. You learn that different herbs require different drying techniques. Leaves press flat in a cool, dry place. Flowers hang in small bundles. Roots and bark cut into small pieces on a hearth near ashes. Over the next days, you help her lay out herbs on racks above the fire to dry. You turn them regularly so that they air dry evenly and do not mold. You learn that properly dried and stored, herbs retain their potency for months, a vital insurance against winter and future outbreaks. When the time comes to prepare remedies, your grandmother mixes a handful of dried yarrow and lavender in a clay pot, then pours boiling water over the mixture. She covers the pot with a lid and lets it steep. You learn that the resulting tea soothes fever and calms frayed nerves. Another pot holds a nettle and mint infusion to be sipped throughout the day to purify the blood. For poultices, she grinds dried plantain into powder and mixes it with vinegar and a bit of honey to form a paste. You learn to apply it in a thin layer over cuts and bruises, covering it with cloth to draw out infection. In a small jar, she stirs a syrup of elderberries boiled with sugar and spices. You learn that this syrup builds strength and fights coughs, a precious tonic when fresh food runs low. As you work at her side, you understand why peasants turned to herbs. Long before doctors and apothecaries arrived, the common folk depended on the plants at their doorstep. You learn that gathering and preparing herbs was an all-hands task, a community effort to arm each household with whatever might stave off the plague's cruel hand. By the time the sun sets, you have bagged pouches of dried herbs and labeled each one carefully. You help your grandmother tuck them into a chest with oak shavings to keep them fragrant and pest-free. You learn that wise storage preserves both remedy and hope for the dark days ahead. As you drift to sleep that night, you dream of hedgerows brimming with green and white and violet blossoms. You sense the healing power in each leaf and root. You learn that knowledge of these simple gifts from the earth can mean the difference between life and death when the Black Death's shadow falls upon your village. You wake before dawn to the news that plague has struck the next village over. Smoke still curls above the chimneys there, but carts return empty or askew. Neighbors gather in whispered circles and speak of bodies laid out in that town's square. Fear ripples through the huts like cold wind. Your family moves quickly to erect barriers around the cottage yard. Long stakes are set at each corner and lengths of rope tied between them. This crude fence marks your little patch of ground as off-limits. You learn that quarantine begins with simple steps. A rope line and a whispered warning can keep strangers and sickness at bay. Your grandmother hangs strips of woven rushes in the doorway to deter flies. She lights smouldering sticks of juniper wood and places them in iron pots. The smoke stings your eyes but drives away insects and masks the scent of illness. You learn that peasants use smoke and simple fences to turn home into a haven. Inside the yard, you fill wooden barrels with fresh water, drawn from the well before anyone else uses it. You cover them with cloth to keep out debris. You learn that safe water becomes a treasure when wells lie contaminated or travelers bring disease on their clothes. Your mother bakes extra loaves of barley bread. The oven's fire glows crimson as she shapes dough with flour-dusty hands. You learn that stocking up on staples means staying sheltered longer. Each loaf is a promise of survival if the outside world grows too dangerous. Word arrives that parish priests have begun ringing church bells to drive away evil. Your father smokes sage leaves and ties bunches above the hive of wooden frames where bees once nested. He says the bees will stay calm despite the smoke and that their honey may soothe coughs. You learn that folk wisdom blends with faith when quarantine traps you behind your own walls. As days pass, the rope barrier grows taut with dried mud and stray straw. Neighbors slip food parcels over the fence. A child hands over a jar of pickled onions. You place these gifts beside your own stores. You learn that quarantine tests bonds of trust and forces communities to care for one another from a safe distance. Yet some families lack supplies or fear isolation. They slip out at night and hurry down the lane toward other villages. You watch their lanterns bob in the darkness as they vanish among the fays. Trees. You learn that flight can be an act of desperation rather than courage. Those who depart risk carrying plague to new places or never making it to safety. Your cousin returns one morning, haggard and shaken. He speaks of travelers' wagons turned away at every hamlet. He slept in a ruined chapel under dripping rafters. You learn that the roads become gauntlets of suspicion and hostility. Every traveler is seen as potential death. Your grandmother stitches small red crosses on cloth patches and sews them onto cloaks. The patches mark you as villagers under quarantine. Guards set up at the crossroads wave you past. You learn that a small badge of cloth can buy you safe passage and spare your family a forced confinement without food or water. Still, the fear seeps through the walls. You hear coughing from across the yard and your heart skips. You learn that quarantine can offer safety, yet also magnify every cough and every feverish moan into a tale of doom. At dawn, your father volunteers to bring supplies to the nearest market despite the risk. He walks the muddy road, carrying sacks of wheat and salt. You pray he'll return before nightfall. You learn that some must feed the village, even when the path lies through danger. He comes back at dusk, shoulders bowed under the weight of empty sacks and a single loaf of rye bread. He found the inn door bolted and the landlord gone. You learn that flight can empty hamlets overnight and leave travelers to hunger and cold. The next day, you and your siblings prepare bundles of herbs and dried chicken boiled into broth. You tie them in cloth and hang them over the fence for neighbors who lack gardens. You learn that quarantine can inspire solidarity and that sharing what you have can save more lives than walls of rope. A messenger arrives on horseback, wearing a face-covered mask, made of cloth and layered with cloth strips soaked in vinegar. He carries news of a distant abbey, offering refuge to hardy souls. You learn that some peasants flee to monasteries where isolation is strict and gardens yield medicinal herbs. Your mother bundles you and your sister in wool cloaks and you set off at dawn. You follow the stream through the pasture and cross a fallen log. The morning mist thickens and you lose sight of the cottage yard. You learn that fleeing quarantine strains both body and spirit when every path may lead to illness or hostility. As you travel, you pass abandoned farmhouses with open doors and empty fields. You learn that some families fled in panic, leaving everything behind. The land goes untilled and the harvest rots, plunging survivors into hunger after plague. After 2 days, you reach the abbey's stone walls. A brother at the gate cleans your feet in vinegar water and assigns you to a small hut at the edge of the cloister. You learn that quasi-monastic quarantine brings daily bread and fresh water, but demands isolation within cloister walls. Your grandmother tended to plague victims in your village. Now you kneel in prayer with monks who tend yours here. You learn that faith and quarantine intertwine. Prayer becomes both solace and prescription when fear stalks every hearth. Among the monks you learn to tend wounds and fever, with poultices of comfrey and elder flowers. You gather sloes and sumac berries to make a sour brew believed to ward off infection. You learn that in flight you find both refuge and new knowledge to bring back home. Weeks pass before you return to the village. The rope barriers still stand. The smell of juniper smoke greets you at the gate. You learn that quarantine ends only when the last cough fades and the last body is laid to rest. Inside you find your family well, the beans and barley stores intact. Villagers gather at a distance to share news of deaths and of survivors. You learn that those who stayed faced plague at home while those who fled faced plague on the road. Both hardship and survival leave scars on every soul. You kneel by the hearth and break the rye bread your father brought. You drink a sip of elderberry brew, tasting both relief and sorrow. You learn that quarantine and flight are twin paths through plague. Both demand courage and resourcefulness. In the quiet after the outbreaks, you tend your garden again. You replant yarrow and feverfew at the fence posts. You learn that knowledge of herbs gathered in safety can save lives when sickness returns. Years later, you teach your own children how to build rope barriers and gather juniper smoke. You share stories of journeying through misty woods and of the abbey's cold stone walls. You learn that in the end, the peasants' survival lay not only in fleeing plague, but in forging community and passing on hard-won wisdom. You kneel on the damp earth beside your grandmother as she sorts through the leaves and blossoms you have gathered. The basket sits full of yarrow, feverfew, and early elderflower. Now comes the work of turning these fresh plants into remedies that will last through weeks of sickness and scarce supplies. You learn that gathering is only half the task. The other half is preserving strength and virtue of the herbs. First, she teaches you to dry the blossoms and leaves. You clutch small bundles of yarrow by their stems and hang them upside down from wooden pegs above the hearth. The gentle heat from last night's embers warms without burning. You learn that air circulation is vital. Bundles too close together risk molding. Bundles too far apart dry unevenly. You space them at equal intervals until each stalk feels brittle to the touch. Next, she shows you a shallow basket woven of willow. Inside lie feverfew blossoms laid carefully in a single layer. You learn that flowers and delicate leaves require drying on flat surfaces to preserve shape and fragrance. You place the basket in a warm corner of the cottage where the morning sun slides across the floor. Each hour, you turn the flowers with a careful finger so that none stick together. While the herbs dry, you prepare small cloth packets. You cut squares of linen from an old sheet and stitch the edges with coarse thread to form little pillows. Into each, you will place a measured spoonful of dried plant. You learn that these packets make brewing tea easier. They help strain the leaves, so you do not need a separate strainer or cloth every time you boil water. When the yarrow and feverfew are dry, you remove the bundles and baskets. The blossoms and leaves crumble easily between your fingers. You fill each linen packet with 2 tablespoons of herb. You learn that proper dosage matters. Too little may have no effect. Too much can cause nausea or sweating until the body grows weak. Your grandmother notes how many packets you fill and writes the count on a scrap of parchment. Next, you turn to elderflower. You have gathered its flat clusters at the top of tall stems. You strip the flowers gently and discard the green bits. You learn that only the white flowers carry the healing virtues. You spread them on a cloth by the hearth to dry slowly without direct heat. You watch how the little blossoms change from moist and soft to papery and light. With the elderflower dry, you pour it into a clean clay jar with a wide mouth. You press the lid down firmly and tie a cloth over it to keep out dust. You learn that storing herbs in sealed containers prevents moisture and pests from ruining the remedy. You label the jar with the name of the flower and the date of drying. At midday, you fetch water from the well. You fill a large iron kettle and stoke the fire beneath it. The water begins to steam, and you add a packet of yarrow tea. The aroma rises like a promise of relief. You learn that decoction of roots and stems requires longer boiling. In that case, you break up the dried stalks into small pieces before adding them to the kettle. You stir with a wooden spoon until the liquid turns pale gold. When the brew is simmering, you strain through a cloth into a wooden bowl. Then you ladle the tea into cups carved from wood or horn. You share the warm tea with your grandmother before you return to gathering roots. She drinks deeply and nods approval. You learn that tasting and feeling the remedy helps you remember its potency and its effect on the body. After the meal, you collect comfrey roots from the muddy bank of a nearby stream. You learned last season how comfrey draws heat from inflammation and soothes broken flesh. You wash each root in cool water, rubbing away mud until the skin shines. You slice them into thin rounds with a knife sharpened on a stone. You learn that slicing increases surface area so the healing juices release more easily. You spread the comfrey rounds on a flat stone by the hearth. The stone's warmth goes on slowly, drying the roots without burning them. You learn that assessing dryness requires pressing a slice between thumb and finger. If it feels crisp, the root is ready. If it feels damp, you leave it another day. Once dry, you grind the comfrey slices between two stones into a fine powder. You learn that powder form allows mixing with liquids or binding into salves. You store the powder in a clay jar next to the elderflower. Your grandmother then fetches a small pot of oily grease rendered from sheep fat. She heats it gently in a skillet and adds a pinch of comfrey powder. You learn that a salve combines oil and herb, so you stir until the mixture cools into a smooth paste. You transfer the salve into small pots, clay or wooden, to have on hand when someone's skin grows hot and raw with fever. As evening falls, you gather rue and plantain. Rue's bitter leaves ease chills when boiled. Plantain's broad leaves, pressed fresh, relieve the itching of flea bites when the plague drove people inside close together. You learn to tear the plantain leaves and bind them with clean cloth into poultices. You place the poultice in a small wooden dish and cover it with damp cloth to preserve moisture until morning. Before sleep, you hang the last bundles of seasonable herbs above the hearth. Thyme for respiratory distress, mint for nausea, lavender for restlessness. You learn that the herb garden changes with the seasons. You must dry and store enough in summer and autumn to sustain through the winter. In the dim light, you organize your jars and packets on a low shelf. You align them by name and by use. You learn that order matters when the plague's fever sends someone into delirium. In such hours, you must find the right remedy at once. Finally, you sit by the hearth with a cup of elderflower tea and a slice of dry bread. You lean against your grandmother's side and listen to the fire crackle. You learn today how gathering is only the start. Proper processing and preparation make the difference between life and death. In the gentle warmth of drying herbs, you feel the world still holds hope, even as disease rages beyond the cottage walls. Before dawn, the church bell rings out across the village green, and you join your neighbors at the stone chapel steps. Everyone carries a small wooden cross or a strip of cloth dipped in holy water. You learn that in times of plague, faith is both a comfort and a command. The priest emerges wearing his plain vestments and holds aloft a silver reliquary. Inside rests a fragment of bone said to belong to Saint Edmund. You learn that relics were believed to carry the power of the saints themselves to ward off disease and even to bring the dead back to life. The reliquary glints in the slow morning light as the priest raises it high for all to see. At his signal, the procession begins. You fall into line behind a tall woman who clutches an icon of the Virgin Mary. Children join hands and walk barefoot in the grass. You learn that walking barefoot is a sign of penance and solidarity with those who lie dying in unwashed beds. The cold dew stings your feet, but you press on, believing the sacrifice draws divine mercy. The hymn rises and falls as the procession winds through the village lanes. Your voice cracks on the first notes but grows stronger as you see your neighbor's face and feel the shared hope. You learn that communal prayer can steel the spirit against despair even when the body grows weak with fever. At each crossroads, the priest halts the group and sprinkles holy water toward the four directions. He intones a prayer against pestilence. You learn that the act of blessing each path is meant to seal the village boundaries with divine protection, keeping the plague from passing beyond these lanes and fields. When you pass the home of a recently buried neighbor, the priest pauses and lifts the reliquary. A hush falls over the crowd as the family steps forward. They bow their heads and press a palm against the outer coffin door. The priest places a hand on the reliquary and prays for forgiveness of any sin that brought the disease upon their loved one. You learn that in these moments, faith becomes a form of communal therapy, acknowledging grief and seeking comfort through sacred ritual. As the procession reaches the field behind the chapel, you see the makeshift altar set upon a flat stone. On it lie loaves of blessed bread and cups of consecrated wine. The priest breaks the bread and passes a piece to each man and woman who kneels. You learn that receiving communion in the open air was believed to draw the life of the spirit into every part of the body, reinforcing health where the flesh was weak. When the ceremony concludes, the procession returns through the village. Children run ahead to announce the blessing at each door. You learn that the ritual extends its power as people touch blessed water or relics in passing, carrying the grace of the procession into every hearth. Not all responses are gentle. You hear that in a neighboring hamlet, the priest condemned a family for hiding a sick relative, accusing them of keeping death unconfessed and unshriven. The villagers seized the family's livestock and beat the husband to make him reveal the hiding place. You learn that faith can become coercion when fear of plague overrides compassion. Back at your cottage, your grandmother pins a small piece of cloth stained with holy oil above the door lintel. She whispers a prayer of protection. You learn that faith's symbols become guardians in the mind as much as on the body. The cloth will fade in time, but the memory of blessing lives on. That evening, you attend a vigil in the dark chapel. The rafters echo with whispered psalms and the flicker of tallow candles. A young widow stands by a pillar, her face streaked with tears. The priest comforts her with words of resurrection and hope. You learn that in the long hours of night, faith offers a refuge where reason has failed. Yet rumors swirl of flagellant bands marching through the countryside. Men whip their backs until blood flows, crying that only such penance can end God's wrath. You learn that extremity of ritual can arise when fear of plague eclipses ordinary piety. These bands are often turned away at village gates for the risk they bring of carrying disease in their wounds. On market day, wandering friars arrive with portable relics and quick cures. They sell vials of blessed water at a high price. You learn that while faith can open hearts, it also invites those who profit from fear. The poor cannot afford these holy trinkets, yet they watch as wealthier neighbors clasp them to their chests. In the field where the procession ended, a small girl drifts outside the chapel walls, reciting a prayer for the dead. She clutches a sprig of rue and a piece of cord meant to bind disease itself. You learn that children absorb faith by watching ceremony and by carrying simple charms. Their innocence intertwines with belief in ways adults sometimes forget. Late in the night, you return to your cot and whisper a prayer for your own safety. You learn that saying the words aloud can bring dry comfort even when the head aches with fever. You press your hand against the reliquary's replica carved from wood, remembering the silver fragment held by the priest. In the days that follow, you see both mercy and force born of faith. A family gathers at the chapel to pray for their patriarch who lies stricken. They weep and remain until the doors close at dusk. Meanwhile, in the square, Another family tries to drive out a sick cousin, fearing that his uncleanness will draw God's wrath on the entire household. You learn that faith can unite and divide in equal measure. As the Black Death lingers, you come to understand that prayer processions and relics offered the peasants a sense of control in a world gone mad. You learned the names of saints invoked for protection, and the steps of ritual meant to bind divine favor to your fields and livestock. Yet you also saw the darker side of fervor, where suspicion and coercion turned neighbor against neighbor. Under the heavy sky of plague, you walked in prayer for days and nights, clutching holy symbols and hoping for mercy. You felt the power of communal devotion urging your spirit onward. You also felt the undercurrent of fear pushing you to join whispers of blame against outsiders. You learned that faith in the medieval world was never simple. It was a force that offered solace and threat, comfort and condemnation, all in the same breath under the shadow of death. Your grandmother smiles as you press fresh feverfew into the side of the basket. The morning mist still clings to the grass, and you feel tiny droplets on your cheeks. She beckons you further along the hedgerow where the soil is richer and the plants grow taller. You learn that some of the most powerful remedies hide in the darkest shade. You step over a fallen branch, and your foot brushes against a patch of stinging nettle. You recoil at the sharp sting of its tiny hairs. Your grandmother plucks a leaf and holds it out to you. She instructs you to crush it between your fingers until you see a pale sap. You learn that nettle, boiled into broth, can ease aches in joints and muscles, and that the sting you felt is nothing compared to the relief it can bring. You tuck a few leaves into the basket, careful to press the soft side of the leaf against your fingers. Nearby you see clusters of creamy white blossoms atop long stalks. Your grandmother kneels and breaks one off. She crushes it in her hand and breathes in the fragrance. You learn that elderflower tea can break a fever and soothe sore throats. She plucks a handful of blossoms and lays them gently in the basket so they do not bruise. Moving on, you pass a clump of wild garlic growing beneath a thicket of bramble. The pungent scent reaches you before you see the broad leaves. You learn that wild garlic can purify water in small doses and serve as an antibiotic in wound poultices. Your grandmother tears a leaf and hands it to you to taste. The burn on your tongue surprises you with its strength. You wrap several leaves in cloth so they stay fresh until you return home. A few steps ahead, the hedgerow opens to a sunlit clearing where you spot a plant with purple flowers on tall, slender spikes. Your grandmother crouches beside it and whispers the name again so you memorize it. Sage. You learn that sage leaves crushed into a paste can clean cuts and slow infection. She shows you how to strip the leaves from the stalk and arrange them flat in the basket. Along the edge of the clearing, you notice golden yellow blossoms nodding on short stems. Your grandmother identifies them as St. John's wort. She warns you to handle it with care, for it can stain cloth and skin. You learn that oil infused with these leaves and flowers can help heal wounds and lift spirits in times of great despair. You pick a small bundle, wrapping it in your scarf to keep it from brushing against the other herbs. At the far end of the clearing, you hear the low hum of bees. Your grandmother points to a trailing vine of ivy climbing the trunk of an old oak. She plucks a few leaves and crushes them in her palm. You learn that ivy leaves boiled into a tea can ease coughs and chest pains. You press some of the sap into a tiny bottle she brought to carry tinctures home. Below the oak, you spot a carpet of low-growing green. Your grandmother kneels once more and brushes a few leaves aside. Beneath them are bright red berries and glossy leaves. Berries for later, she says with a smile. For now we need the leaves of you, only in small dose they ease pain and reduce fever. You learn that you can be deadly if misused and that your grandmother trusts you to handle it only under her watchful eye. As you fill the basket, you notice the thin tendrils of a climbing plant bearing tiny white star-shaped flowers. It is cleavers. You learn that cleavers brewed into a tea can flush poisons from the body and help with swelling. Your grandmother shows you how to wrap it into small bundles so the juice does not spill. A gentle breeze stirs the leaves overhead and you feel a cool shadow fall across your shoulders. You look up to see a hawthorn tree heavy with blossoms. You learn that petals gathered at dawn carry extra power in salves to calm fever dreams. You pick a few petals and tuck them into a folded cloth. The basket is now full of leaves, blossoms, and berries. You pause to set it down and catch your breath. Your grandmother reaches into her apron pocket and produces a small clay pot containing dried mint. She sprinkles some into the basket to freshen the herbs on the journey home. You learn that mint soothes the stomach and eases nausea that often comes with high fever. As you turn to leave the clearing, you stumble over a tangle of ivy and moss. You learn that in this task you must both pay attention to each step and to the plants you seek. A misstep might rip the most fragile herbs or cause you to miss a hidden cluster of healing blooms. On the path back, you pass a small rise where dewdrops cling to spiderwebs. Your grandmother stops and points to a single glowing drop balanced on a silk strand. She collects the drop on a leaf and explains that such dew gathered before sunrise can strengthen any potion. You learn that magic sometimes lies in the simplest things, and that the lines between folk wisdom and healing are often blurred. As you emerge from the hedgerow into the open pasture, the air smells sweet with herbs and earth. You feel the weight of the basket against your arm, and notice how a gentle curve of the branches forms a tunnel behind you. You learn that the world of medicine belongs as much to fields and hedges as to any doctor's house. At the cottage door, you set the basket down on the table. Your grandmother instructs you to sort the herbs by type: roots and leaves in one pile, blossoms in another, and berries in a small dish. You learn that preparation is as important as gathering. Each herb must be dried or crushed at the correct time, or it loses its potency. Inside, she lights the hearth fire and sets a pot of water to boil. You learn that soon you will begin the distillation of teas and the steeping of infusions to prepare salves and syrups. But first you have gathered the knowledge that only by recognizing and respectfully harvesting the gifts of the land can you hope to soothe fever and ease pain in a time when no healer stood near. As the first tendrils of smoke rise from the hearth, you look at the simple array of plants laid out before you. You learn that in this humble task of gathering herbs lies the hope of survival for families confronting the Black Death. Each leaf and blossom carries a promise of relief and a reminder that even in the darkest time, nature can offer a thread of life. You wake before dawn to the low moan of hunger echoing through the village. The fields lie bare where last season's wheat failed in the drought. You learn that without grain, the stores run low fast, and that each mouthful you save becomes a scarce treasure. You and your neighbors gather at the manor mill to collect remaining grain for the week. The miller's wife measures out ration by ration from a single sack. You learn that rising prices mean your daily loaf now weighs only half its former size. Each child's portion grows smaller as the weeks wear on. As daylight strengthens, you walk toward the common fields. Your eyes rest on empty furrows, once ploughed and sown. You recall last year's green shoots that fed the village through winter. You learn that crop failures can stem from too little rain or too much heat, or from blight that withers grain before it ripens. At the field edge, you kneel to inspect the soil. It cracks under your fingertips and offers no sign of life. You learn that healthy earth must smell of compost and moisture. Today it smells of dust and decay. Your tools lie unused because there is nothing left to tend. Back in the village, you hear rumors that grain ships still lie in harbor, but the price has climbed too high for peasant purse. You learn that merchants hoard supplies to drive up demand, and that you face the choice of watching food drift away or trading your few coins for a handful of grain. By midday, your children's cries grow louder. You have fed them porridge made of acorn meal and dried peas, but hunger claws at their bellies. You learn that foraging becomes necessity when the fields give no harvest. Tomorrow you will gather wild roots and nuts. At dusk, you set out with a small basket and a stick to pry mushrooms and tubers from the forest floor. You tread carefully on damp moss. You learn that oak roots can be pounded into meal, but require hours of leaching to remove bitterness. You carry water in a leather skin to boil each handful of roots before tasting. You find clumps of stinging nettles near a stream. You know that young shoots boiled in water can serve as greens rich in vitamins. You learn which leaves to pick without wincing the sting from your fingertips. You pluck shoots into your basket and wrap them in cloth to cook later. Night falls before you return. Your basket is half full of nettles, a few mushrooms, and some small blackberries. You learn that every morsel matters now. At home, you boil nettles with ash water to soften them and serve the children a thin stew. Their eyes brighten at the taste of greens. Your partner begins to fashion a trap from twigs and string beneath the barn rafters. You learn that small game, such as rats or mice, can be a source of protein when nothing else remains. You watch as your partner places bait inside the trap. At dawn, you will check for a catch. That night, you sit by the fire and toast what little flour you have on a heated stone. You press it flat and cook it until it blisters, then break it into crumbs. You learn that toasted crumbs can fill bellies enough to dull hunger through the night. In your dreams, you see the empty fields and hear the crack of dry earth. You learn that famine lives in sleep as much as in waking hours. Each dawn you rise knowing that foraging and trapping lie ahead rather than ploughing and sowing. A week later, the trap holds a small rat. You learn that rat meat must be skinned carefully to avoid disease. You roast it on a spit above the embers. The family gathers close and eats in silence. Hunger transforms the poorest of fare into feast. At sunrise the next day, you join other villagers in an organized raid on the manor's woodpile. You sack fallen branches chopped by the steward for firewood. You learn that every stick stolen or borrowed brings you warmth but risks the Lord's anger. Today you choose warmth for the children over the steward's wrath. By midday you pound marrow bones found in the dump. You boil them until the marrow floats free. You skim the fat and mix the broth with nettle leaves. You learn that even the scraps thrown away hold life and sustenance, if you know how to treat them. As famine deepens, you hear talk of relief caravans sent by neighboring baronies. You learn that when a village starves the church, or a wealthy patron sometimes sends grain wagons. You hope these rumors hold truth, because otherwise fields will remain empty and bellies will grow hollow. You end the day by sharing a small bowl of nettle and bone broth with your children. You taste iron and earth in each spoonful. You learn that survival now depends on woods and warrens, and on your own skill at turning the forest floor into food. In the hush before sleep, you vow to teach your children what you have learned, which roots to gather, which leaves to boil, which traps to set. You learn that knowledge passed from one generation to the next may prove more valuable than any harvest. Beyond the feverfew patch, your grandmother points out a stand of saintuation, John's wort, its bright yellow petals clustered around a dark center. You learn that bruised blossoms pressed into oil and applied to the skin help ease pain from wounds and bruises. She shows you how to gather only the open flowers, leaving unopened buds to mature for later harvest. Carefully, you slip a handful into your cloth bundle, mindful that the plant will yield best when picked at midday, just after the dew has dried. Moving along the path, you notice a stand of lavender growing near an old stone wall. The fragrant purple spikes sway gently in the morning breeze. Your grandmother explains that lavender's scent calms the mind and soothes frayed nerves. You learn that steeping sprigs in hot water makes a fragrant tea to ease restlessness and support sleep. She hands you a small bundle to hang in your cottage rafters, so the steam from the hearth carries its comfort through the night air. You step carefully around patches of nettles, watching your grandmother dip a nettle leaf in a bowl of water and then rub it gently on her wrist. A mild sting quickly fades, and leaves the skin tingling. She smiles and explains that cooked nettle makes a rich soup full of vitamins and can help strengthen the body weakened by fever. You learn that even common weeds can offer hidden health benefits when used with care. On the far side of the hedgerow, you discover plantain, its broad leaves pressed close to the ground. Your grandmother crushes a leaf and applies the juice to a small cut on her finger. The sting is slight, but the swelling subsides within minutes. You learn that plantain's simple poultice heals insect bites and minor wounds, drawing out toxins and protecting against infection. You tuck several leaves between pages of your book of notes, confident you will return to gather more later. Nearby, a tall stand of comfrey catches your attention, with its bell-shaped flowers in shades of pale blue and purple. Your grandmother warns you that comfrey's roots and leaves can speed the repair of broken bones and torn sinews. She shows you how to dig gently around the base of a plant to lift a root section, taking care not to uproot the entire plant. You learn that comfrey must be harvested sparingly, so it can continue to grow for seasons to come. Further along, you spot elderflower clusters hanging like tiny lanterns beneath the branches of a gnarly elder tree. You learn that elderflower tea, made by steeping the blooms in hot water, can relieve coughs and clear congestion in the chest. Your grandmother plucks only the open flowers, leaving the green buds to ripen into dark berries for use in cordials and preserves later in the season. As you gather elderflower, you hear the distant clatter of a cart on the lane. A neighbor has brought news of sickness in the next village. You learn that time is of the essence when plague strikes. Quickly, you collect enough elderflower for several cups of tea, knowing the herbal infusion may ease labored breathing and comfort aching joints. Turning back toward the heart of the hedgerow, you come across a low, spreading shrub with bright red berries. You recognize dog rose. Your grandmother plucks a few hips and shows you the fine hairs inside. Cautioning you to avoid those irritants, she splits the hips in half and scoops out the seeds and hair. You learn that crushed dog rose hips make a syrup rich in vitamin C to support the immune system. You place them carefully into your basket, noting that you will need to simmer them in water and sweeten the syrup with honey to mask their tartness. Just beyond the dog rose, you find a patch of sorrel, its arrow-shaped leaves bright against the soil. Your grandmother plucks one and tastes its sharp tang. She explains that sorrel salad eases digestive troubles and helps settle nausea, often accompanying fever. You learn to mix sorrel with garlic and wild onions to create a simple relish that lifts the appetite of those too ill to eat plain broth. You reach the edge of the hedgerow and find mint growing against a rough wooden fence. Its strong fragrance fills your nostrils. You learn that mint tea brings relief to upset stomachs and clears the head. Your grandmother bundles a fistful and ties it with twine so it can hang above the hearth, releasing its aroma when the smoke rises. You note that drying herbs for winter use will ensure you have remedies when fresh plants are no longer available. In a damp corner shaded by a large oak, you spot marshmallow plants, their pink flowers peeking through heart-shaped leaves. Your grandmother explains that marshmallow root boiled in water yields a thick mucilage that coats the throat and eases coughing fits. You learn that this remedy can soothe raw lungs and calm spasmodic coughs that plague those suffering from chest infections. You carefully dig a small root segment, mindful to replant a piece so the marshmallow will regrow. Beyond the marshmallow, you find a few clumps of valerian, its feathery leaves and small white flowers growing tall. Your grandmother bends to gather only a few sprigs, warning that valerian's potent qualities require small doses. You learn that dried valerian root steeped in wine can still the shivering and bring calm to minds tormented by fever dreams and restlessness. As your basket grows heavy with green and gold and purple, you pause to admire the collection. You learn that knowledge of hundreds of plants and their uses passes from generation to generation through hands-on teaching and careful note-taking. Your grandmother opens a cloth satchel and presses a small notebook into your hands. In it, she has drawn simple sketches of each plant with notes on harvest times and preparation methods. You learn that recording this wisdom will help preserve it for times when families scatter and elders pass away. On the walk back to your cottage, you smell the mingled scents of your harvest, the bitterness of yarrow, the sweetness of elderflower, the warmth of comfrey. You learn that these plants represent hope against disease, each leaf and blossom a small shield against the plague's terror. At home, you spread the herbs on a wooden table, ready to sort and dry them. You learn that yarrow and sage must be hung to dry in a warm, airy place, while marshmallow root needs slow roasting before storage. Elderflower blossoms require soft, gentle handling to preserve their delicate aroma. As the sun climbs higher, you set pots of water over the hearth. You plan to brew teas and syrups throughout the day. You learn that gathering herbs is only half the work. Turning them into usable remedies demands patience, attention, and the steady build-up of larder stores. With your grandmother, you begin the ritual of washing, rinsing, chopping, and arranging each herb for future use. You learn to balance fresh usage with drying for winter, ensuring that every remedy stays within reach, even when cold winds blow and the world beyond your door grows white. By evening, the table holds neat piles of herbs, each labeled with rustic tags. Tea leaves steep in bowls, filling the cottage with healing scents. You learn that through gathering herbs, peasants shaped their own defense against the Black Death, wielding nature itself to soothe fever and pain when no physician would come. As you close your notebook and cover the herbs for the night, you feel the quiet pride of a skill learned and passed on. You learn that in the struggle against plague, every leaf gathered and every potion prepared carried the weight of survival. And in your hands you hold the living wisdom of those who came before, ready to guide you through whatever challenges tomorrow may bring. You crouch low inside the hut as dawn light filters through the thatch. The floor is packed, earth softened by foot traffic, and the damp of last night's rain. Your feet sink into the mud with each step. You learn that keeping your home clean is a struggle against the very ground beneath your toes. The hut is small and packed. A single room serves for cooking, sleeping, and sheltering your entire household. You share this space with your parents, your siblings, and sometimes an orphan or two from the village. You learn that privacy is a luxury you cannot afford. When you lie down on your straw mattress, you press your cheek against the damp earth and taste grit on your lips. The walls are wattle and daub, patched with mud and straw. Where the wind blows through a crack, you feel a draft. You place a clay pot there to catch rain and keep puddles from forming on the floor. You learn that every fix is temporary until the next storm washes the roof or collapses a wall. In one corner sits the hearth. A pile of wood glows in the ashes from last night's fire. The smoke rises through a hole in the roof and clings to the rafters. You learn that the same smoke that warms you also darkens your lungs. Each cough reminds you that clean air is as precious as clear water. Beside the hearth, you store grain and root vegetables in woven baskets. A few onions hang from a peg. When rain drips through the thatch, it soaks the nearest basket. You drag your sleeve through the water to mop up the damp and toss the soaked grain back into the pot. You learn that food storage is a fight against moisture and mold. You bend to sweep the floor with a broom made of twigs, bound together with rope. Each pass gathers clumps of mud hair and stray straw. You sweep the mess into a corner where a cat sleeps. When the cat stirs, it scatters the pile into dusty motes that rise around your head. You learn that even cleaning can spread dirt unless you carry the debris outside to the midden. Outside the hut, a narrow track leads to the latrine pit. You carry the bucket fashioned from a carved oak stump and lower it into the hole. The stench rises in a wave. You learn that without a proper cesspit, the smell seeps back into the hut when wind shifts. You hold your breath and hurry through the chores. The latrine pit is shared by half a dozen families. A crude fence of brushwood surrounds it, but offers little privacy. You learn that modesty gives way to necessity when the risk of disease lies in every drop of rainwater that soaks the soil. Back in the hut, you spread fresh straw along the floor to absorb moisture. Your sister tosses handfuls of dry rushes to you from the bundle she stores beside the door. You learn that adding fresh bedding every week keeps the mud from seeping through the straw and into your bones. A neighbor arrives to borrow a bowl of water. You fill the bowl from the rainwater barrel and notice a film of scum on its surface. You learn that without a well inside the hut, all water carries risk of sickness. You warn your neighbor to let the water stand before drinking. As midday heat dries the floor, you open the door to let light in. A gust of wind blows dust and ashes from the hearth across your feet. You lean on the door frame and stare at footprints in the mud that lead to neighboring huts. You learn that every footstep in the village carries particles of soil and waste that cling to clothes and shoes. You walk to the door of the communal bakehouse. The baker greets you with a nod but no smile. The floor there is harder packed earth but still covered in charcoal dust and straw. You place your loaf on the counter without setting your feet back on the floor. You learn that avoiding direct contact with the ground is a common trick to keep your shoes from soaking up filth. When you return home, a neighbor's child follows you and coughs in your ear. A sickly smell lingers on his breath. You learn that within these huts, disease spreads in silence. Every cough and every fever is carried across low partitions and through open doorways. In the afternoon, you carry a basket of laundry to the stream. You scrub the clothes on a flat stone and rinse them in the running water. The river glints in the light, but you see bits of refuse floating past. You learn that washing clothes in the same water where animals drink and people bathe invites sickness back home with you. On the way back, you hang the garments on a line strung between two posts. The breeze blows them out like flags. You learn that sunlight kills some germs, but that the shade of the hut will soon reclaim the damp. As evening falls, you gather wood for the hearth. You learn that cutting fresh twigs and branches from the hedgerow near the latrine pit risks carrying invisible poison into the hut. Each splinter could hold harmful bacteria. You shake every stick hard before it enters your home. Inside, you cook a thin pottage of barley and beans. Steam rises and you stir with a wooden spoon. A mouse darts from behind the pot and your brother shrieks. You grab a cudgel and strike at the air. You learn that vermin thrive in the chaos of shared huts and forage for crumbs. Keeping mice out of food requires constant vigilance. You ladle the pottage into bowls and pass them around. Your mother says grace but hurries to cover the pot when a gust blows smelly air from the latrine pit through the open doorway. You learn that the line between nourishment and poison often passes at the threshold. After supper, everyone gathers around the hearth. Your grandfather tells tales of times before the plague when huts stood farther apart and wells in the center of the village kept water clean. You learn that memory of better days highlights the grim present. You sleep in the corner on your straw. The walls, still warm from the hearth, cling to your back. You hear your siblings cough and your mother's muffled prayers. You learn that in this crowded space, every breath carries both comfort and peril. Only dawn's light and your grandmother's broom can sweep away the night's damp and begin the cycle anew. You crouch beside the plant and brush away a cloaking leaf to reveal a cluster of small green buds. Your grandmother smiles and says this is ground elder, also called goutweed. You learn that simmering its leaves with honey makes a sweet syrup that soothes coughs and eases chest pain. You pinch off a handful of young shoots and place them gently in your basket. Stomping carefully through tall grass, you find a patch of plantain with broad-ribbed leaves. Your grandmother demonstrates how to crush a leaf between your fingers until a sticky green juice oozes out. You learn that rubbing this juice onto insect bites staves off itching and that spreading it on small cuts helps them heal. You tear several leaves and tuck them into your cloth bundle. Next, you locate a small stand of comfrey growing in shade. Its bell-shaped purple flowers nod on slender stems. Your grandmother warns you never to eat comfrey internally since that can harm the liver. Instead, you harvest some roots, slice them thin, and wrap them in linen to press onto sprains and bruises. You learn that comfrey earned the name boneset because it helps mend broken tissue. Ahead, you spot a line of elder bushes heavy with white umbels. You learn that steeping the blossoms in warm water makes a fragrant wash for feverish skin, and that the berries cooked with wine make a restorative tonic. You cut carefully beneath the flower heads and slide each cluster into the basket. Your grandmother cautions to never pick the small red berries, yet to wait until they turn deep purple late in summer. When nettles brush against your leg, you pull them gently by the stem and capture a handful. You feel the tiny stings, but remind yourself of their value. You learn that cooking nettles destroys the sting and transforms them into a nourishing broth rich in vitamins. Your grandmother tells you to bruise the leaves first to hasten cooking. You add them to your foraging load and thank them for their gift. Venturing toward the edge of a damp meadow, you see bright yellow buttercups dancing in soft breeze. Your grandmother laughs softly and tells you to leave them be, for they can irritate skin when fresh. Instead, she points to a creeping yellow flower at the base of the grass. You kneel and see creeping buttercup, or lesser celandine with glossy petals. You learn that boiling its roots helps draw out bile and calm digestive fever. You harvest a few roots carefully so the plant regrows. You brush past clumps of lavender, growing near a fallen stone wall. The blue-purple spikes fill the air with a calming scent. You learn that drying lavender buds in a cloth pouch and hanging them in a sick room eases restlessness and calms anxiety. You cut a handful of spikes and bind them in your cloth bundle. On the far side of the meadow, you discover a cluster of marigold blossoms the color of sunrise. Your grandmother plucks petals and explains that steeping them in oil creates a salve that prevents infection in small wounds. You learn that strong color often signals healing power. You separate the petals and place them in a jar carried from home. Sunlight shifts, and you realize midsummer is fleeting. You and your grandmother gather speed. You find meadowsweet with feathery white flowers atop tall stalks. You learn that chewing its prosint flowers can ease headache and relieve mild aches. You gather a few heads and crush them into your palm to release a sweet almond scent. As noon arrives, you return along the hedgerow toward home. You pause at a muddy bank and spot willow leaves by the water. You learn that willow bark contains salicin, a precursor to modern aspirin. Your grandmother strips a small branch and scrapes bits of bark into a packet. You learn to dry it later and to brew it as a bitter tea for fever and pain. Back in the cottage, you empty your harvest on a wooden table. You sort leaves, roots, petals, and blossoms into separate piles. You learn that careful organization prevents accidental mixing of plants with lookalikes. You see how yarrow resembles common tansy, yet no one heals, and the other can cause vomiting if overused. You begin preparing remedies. First, you chop comfrey roots into thin slices and place them in a shallow clay dish. You soak them in warm water to soften. Then you crush nettle leaves between smooth stones and wrap the pulp in clean linen for use as a wet compress. You learn that time spent in preparation is as vital as time spent in gathering. You spread elderflower umbels on a dry cloth and lay them in the sun to wilt. Later, you will steep them in water for a gentle infusion to calm coughs. You bundle thyme and rosemary stems and hang them above the hearth to dry for future use in clearing congestion. Next, you fill a cauldron with water and heat it over the fire. You add feverfew blossoms and let the water bubble gently. You learn that too fierce a boil destroys the delicate oils. After 10 minutes, you strain the liquid and pour it into a wooden mug for your grandmother. She sips slowly and breathes out relief. You learn that seeing the healing in another's eyes honors your work more than any praise. By afternoon, you have jars of dried herbs, sacks of roots, and a small flask of tincture made from willow bark and wine. You learn that storing medicine safely away from pests is as important as harvesting it at the right moment. Your grandmother praises you for learning quickly. She tells you that when the plague comes to the village, these herbs will not cure every ailment but can ease pain, calm fever, and comfort the sick. You learn that in the face of overwhelming danger, every small remedy offers hope where despair else threatened. As dusk falls, you hang your bundles to dry and cover your jars with cloth lids. You recall the names of each plant: yarrow, feverfew, plantain, comfrey, elderflower, nettle, creeping buttercup, lavender, marigold, meadowsweet, willow bark. You learn to gather them responsibly, respect their power, and prepare them carefully. By night, you rest with a cooled herbal compress on your grandmother's brow. You learn that life, at the edge of death, depends on knowledge passed from hand to hand, from hedge to hearth, and you drift to sleep to dreams scented of flowers and healing green leaves ready to greet the dawn. You rise before dawn to tend the fire beneath a blackened pot. In the flicker of flame, you pull out a handful of dried roots and flowers stored in earthenware jars on a shelf. Today you will mix poultices and potions passed down from mothers and grandmothers who learned their cures by trial and error through many seasons of sickness and death. First, you gather plantain leaves from the small garden by the cottage door. You crush them between stone and pestle until they become a moist pulp. You add fresh water and a pinch of salt, then spread the mixture thickly upon a scrap of linen. This poultice you will press to the swellings and blisters that mark the plague's cruel course. You learn that plantain draws out poisons from the flesh and soothes the burning pain of infection. Next, you fetch a handful of lavender blossoms. The scent alone lifts your spirits and eases the tremor in your hands. You pour boiling water over the blossoms in a simple clay bowl and cover it with a cloth napkin. While the lavender steeps, you wrap the cloth around your wrists to breathe in its vapors. You learned that lavender calms fevered minds and helps ease the restless wakefulness that comes with chills and delirium. Beside the pot, you find a small jar of crushed garlic. You peel and mince a couple of cloves before stirring them into a mug of hot broth. The bitter tang catches your tongue. You learned that garlic has long been said to ward off disease in the air itself. Some old wives claim that hanging a bundle of garlic over doorways can keep the sickness at bay. Whether by art or by faith, it brings a measure of hope to your household. You prepare a rosehip syrup by simmering the bright red hips in water until they soften. You strain out seeds and skins, then stir in a spoonful of honey. The thick liquid you will give to children and elders alike to help their bodies build strength. You learn that rose hips offer a rich dose of vitamin C, even if you do not know the science behind it. In another bowl, you combine root of comfrey with rendered animal fat. You heat the mixture gently until the comfrey fibers soften into the grease. When cool, you apply the salve to cracked skin and raw patches. The fatty base seals moisture in while the comfrey soothes and helps knit torn flesh back together. You learn that comfrey carries the name knitbone for its power to help broken bones or broken flesh heal faster. You set a small flask of vinegar beside the hearth. From it, you draw a few drops into a spoon and let a sick neighbor swallow it slowly. Vinegar, you learned, carries a cleansing power. It can help settle a churning stomach and perhaps prevent the growth of certain evil humors in the body. Some mothers also dab it behind the ears to ward off the bite of fleas thought to carry the sickness. Next, you consult a worn scrap of parchment where your grandmother recorded charms of protection. You cut pieces of red cloth into small squares. Into each you place a pinch of rosemary, dried rue and vervain. You tie the cloth into tiny bundles and sew them into the neckline of tunics or hang them around the neck. You learn that these herbal charms may do no more than comfort the heart, but in hard times comfort matters as much as cure. You watch the steam rise from the pot and think of the neighbors trembling beneath fever and cough. At midday, you ladle out a bitter mixture of willow bark tea and honey. Willow bark carries a taste of ash and earth, but you swallow it gratefully for its wisdom. You learned that in centuries to come, People will call the willow bark medicine aspirin, but for now, you only know that it brings relief to aching bones and pounding heads. When the cold wind rattles your cottage walls, you smudge the hearth with a bundle of dried sage. You let the fragrant smoke trace along the beams and into every corner. You learn that sage's cleansing power extends from the air you breathe to the spirit you carry. In this plague season, any comfort for mind and soul is precious. In the late afternoon, you pound fennel seeds into a fine powder. You mix them with warm barley broth to soothe a cough that will not cease. The sweet anise scent fills the room and calms the trembling in your chest. You learned that fennel opens the lungs and clears out phlegm so you can breathe more easily. You set aside a cup of mulberry leaf infusion made by steeping fresh leaves in hot water until the liquid turns pale green. You let an elder sip it slowly to help with their fever. Mulberry you. Learned brings both cooling relief and a measure of strength when the body grows too weak to fight. When the sun dips behind the hill, you prepare a final remedy for the night. You crush a few cloves of nutmeg with a flat stone and stir them into warm milk. The spicy aroma drifts through the room and lulls restless minds into sleep. You learned that nutmeg's warm comfort eases. Chills and dreams bring respite even when the body aches. As you gather the bowls and pestle, you reflect on the long lineage of women who taught you these mixtures. They watched first the plague arrive, and then the loved ones fall ill until only the brave or the desperate remained at their hearth. You learned that each remedy comes not only from plant and root, but from the love and fear of families who refuse to surrender to sickness. Before bed, you tie a small pouch of crushed peppermint leaves to the foot of the cot. The fresh scent helps you breathe easier and reminds you that relief can come in the smallest of charms. You learn that in times when walls close in with fear, the scent of peppermint can keep despair at bay. As you drift into sleep, you see in your mind the patchwork of poultices and potions warming on the hearth. Each remedy stands for hope and for survival. You learn that peasants survived the plague not by the sword or the law, but by the gentle power of herbs, the comfort of shared rituals, and the stubborn belief that life would endure beyond the darkest of seasons. You step lightly through the dew-damp grass as your grandmother leads you to a sunlit clearing where marsh marigold blooms in bright yellow. The petals glisten with moisture. You learn that marsh marigold must be cooked well before use to remove its bitterness and potential toxins. Your grandmother shows you how to snip just the outer rows of petals, leaving the plant to recover. Next, you find a stand of plantain growing along a well-trodden path. Its broad leaves lie flush against the earth. You learn that crushed plantain offers relief for skin irritations and wounds. Your grandmother plucks a few large leaves and tears them into strips to place in a clean cloth. You feel the cool green flesh against your fingers and store the bundle carefully in your basket. A gentle breeze stirs the tall grasses and sends ripples across a nearby marsh. Your grandmother points out meadowsweet, its delicate cream flowers clustered like tiny candles. You learn that meadowsweet contains compounds that ease aches and reduce fever. She cuts the stems below the blossoms and places them stem first into the basket. You learn to gather speedwell by the water's edge next, its blue star-shaped flowers nodding in the light. Speedwell grows near reeds and marsh rushes. You kneel by the muddy bank and find the stems easily. Your grandmother warns you to keep your feet dry to avoid the mud that can carry disease. You learn that once the speedwell is cleaned and dried, it makes a soothing tea for sore throats and coughs. You pick only the flowering tops and leave the lower stems for the plant's roots. Further along, you spy elderflower in bloom. The tree's lacy white clusters hang heavy from its branches. You learn that elderflower tea can ease congestion and bring down high fever. You climb onto a small rock to reach a low branch. You twist the stems gently until the clusters snap free, and then gather them carefully so as not to crush their fragile blooms. Beneath the elder, you notice a patch of lemon balm, whose leaves smell faintly of citrus. Your grandmother taught you to rub a leaf and inhale its calming scent. You learn that this herb can soothe anxiety and help quiet the mind during times of fear. You pluck a handful of leaves and rub them between your palms before tucking them into the cloth bundle to keep their fragrance fresh. Turning away from the hedgerow, you find thyme nestled among stones at the path's edge. Tiny purple flowers dot its low, woody stems. You learn that thyme has antiseptic properties and can help clear chest congestion. You use your knife to cut small sprigs, careful not to strip the plant bare so that it can continue to grow in this dry spot. Your grandmother then guides you to a cluster of stinging nettles. The leaves bristle with tiny hairs that burn if touched. You hesitate, but she shows you how to fold a leaf and pinch the stem before cutting to avoid the sting. You learn that once boiled, these nettles lose their sting and can be eaten as a soup rich in vitamins. You gather long stalks but avoid tearing the leaves so you can harvest again in days to come. At the edge of the clearing, you discover a patch of burnet saxifrage with fern-like leaves and clusters of greenish-white flowers. You learn that a decoction made from the roots was once used to treat fever and to power the body against weakness. Your grandmother instructs you to dig carefully around the roots, washing away soil before cutting them. You learn to be gentle with the plant, so it continues to thrive for future gatherings. You move then to the drier ground where black nightshade grows hidden under bramble. This plant can be dangerous if harvested incorrectly. You learn that only experienced gatherers may take the ripe berries and berries only when dark purple and soft. The faint glow of the stamens warns you of unripe fruit. Your grandmother lets you taste one berry to confirm it is ripe. Its deep flavor tells you it is safe once cooked briefly with other herbs to remove toxins. In the shade of an old oak tree, you find a cluster of comfrey with bell-shaped blossoms. You learn that comfrey was known as knitbone for its ability to aid healing of broken bones and sprains. Your grandmother cuts a few stalks and tears the leaves into sections to be simmered as a poultice. You learn to avoid ingesting large amounts as comfrey can be strong on the liver. At midday, you rest by a shallow stream and inspect your basket. Petals, eyes, and leaves in a riot of green, white, and yellow shimmer in the sunlight. You learn that timing matters when drying herbs. Too much sun can bleach away healing properties. You divide the harvest into portions for drying in shade and for fresh infusion when needed. Your grandmother hands you a clay jar and a clay bowl. She shows you how to layer the herbs with coarse salt so that moisture drains and the herbs remain cool. You learn that salt draws out water and preserves the plants until you can lay them on drying racks beneath cottage eaves. As you follow the path home, you notice the way evening light filters through oak leaves. You feel the weight of the basket balanced on your arm and sense the promise of medicine for those who suffer fever and ache. You learn that without these herbs, many in your village would have no hope when the plague struck. By dusk, you return to the cottage and hang the herbs to dry on wooden poles. Your grandmother lights a small lamp and prepares a pot of water. She plucks a sprig of each herb and drops them into the simmering water. A rich fragrance fills the kitchen. You learn that the next few days will bring bowls of tea and poultices to neighbors in need. In the quiet with the lamp's glow, you reflect on the morning's work. You learn to recognize each plant by leaf and bloom, to harvest with care, and to transform wild growth into medicine. You feel the stirrings of hope. Even in the darkest times, you carry in your basket the power to soothe fever and to slow the march of death through your village. Before dawn, you shoulder a heavy bundle of kindling and set out along the muddy lane toward the abbey 2 leagues away. The path meanders past fields half sown and over a wooden bridge that creaks under your weight. With each step, you feel the chill of morning mist and the promise of danger beyond your village borders. You learn that in plague times, peasants risked every hardship to reach the healing hands of distant monks. Near the abbey gate, you meet other travelers. A weaver from the next shire carries a bolt of rough linen in exchange for one night's lodging with the brothers. A shepherd brings fresh cheese to barter for a sprig of herbs from the apothecary. You learn that barter replaces coin when coin grows scarce. Labor, wood grain, or sheep cheese all become currency on the pilgrimage to health. At the gate, an aged porter greets you with a nod. His nose is red from the cold and his eyes sharp despite his years. He asks what you offer in exchange for admission to the infirmary. You learn that entry to the brothers' hospital demands payment of goods or service. No coin passes from hand to hand unless stamped by the king's mint. You hand over 5 lengths of kindling bound with cord. The porter measures each stick before tipping his head in acceptance. He directs you to the stable yard where you may work stoking kitchen fires until dusk. You learn that day labor in the abbey kitchen can earn both shelter and the chance of a healing poultice. Inside the cloister, you join a dozen other peasants scraping potatoes and washing pots. The brothers oversee your work with gentle eyes. You learn that in the abbey, charity shines brightest in communal service and shared meal. The stink of sweat and boiling broth mingles with the smell of incense that drifts from the chapel. After the midday meal, you present yourself to the infirmarer's cell. A kindly brother greets you and takes your pulse at the wrist. You learn that the monks measure health by both touch and story. They ask you to describe your fever chills and aching joints. You offer a handful of feverfew blossoms and yarrow leaves in exchange for a draught of elderflower tea. He nods and hands you a small cup of pale amber tea. You sip it by the hearth under the watchful gaze of stained glass windows. You learn that each herb must steep in water drawn from the holy spring near the southeast corner of the abbey walls. Only that water, they say, carries the abbey's blessing. In the days that follow, you rise at dawn to chop wood for the furnace and carry water from the creek well. In return, you receive a daily measure of grain, porridge, and more herbal tea by the sexton measure of grain. Infirmary hearth. You learn that these simple exchanges form a fragile economy of care where labor stands in for coin. One morning, the infirmary offers you a silver-bound book of prayers. He asks that you learn a passage by heart and recite it at compline for the souls of the sick. You learn that spiritual service can be as valuable as physical labor in this place. Each prayer you speak weaves another thread in the tapestry of hope. Late one afternoon, a party of travelers arrives from the south. They carry heavy baskets of medicinal roots and dried flowers. They have walked for days to trade saffron and rosemary for turnip seed and wool cloth. You learn that even precious spices gained value as medicine when plague ravaged the land. The abbey infirmary barters small vials of distilled rosewater for a pinch of cinnamon powder and a handful of dried mint leaves. At sunset, you join the travelers at the hearth. You learn how they navigated closed roads and guard patrols to reach the abbey gates. They speak of villages where gates were barred and travelers turned away for fear of contagion. You understand that each journey demanded courage equal to that of knights in armor. One traveler tells of riding across lonely fens in a simple cart drawn by a blind mare. He traded a cowhide cloak for safe passage with a grim reaper's farmhand who claimed to know every bog. You learn that peasants faced far more than bad roads. They faced suspicion and death from bandits or from guards enforcing quarantine. At the infirmary, you volunteer to comfort a woman racked with fever. She speaks in broken breath about her children left behind in the village. You place a willow poultice on her forehead and hum the hymn you learned. You learn that compassion becomes part of the bargain in healing halls. The woman's eyes close in relief, though her cough still rattles. Word arrives that a monk in the abbey garden has discovered a new remedy. He brews willow bark tea with a dash of honey and claims it eases aching joints and fever. You learn that breakthroughs travel slowly among peasants. Only those who risked the journey could taste the latest cures. One evening, the infirmary summons you and offers to train you in the art of distilling simples. He teaches you how to combine lavender and mugwort in an alembic over a gentle flame. You learn that becoming an apothecary's assistant can grant you herbs to carry home and the skill to brew your own remedies. When at last you prepare to leave the abbey, you pack barley seeds from the monastery's granary and a small pouch of salt. You learn that these gifts represent gratitude more than medicine. Grain can replace empty belly in your village, and salt preserves meat for winter lean. At the gate, you receive a final blessing and a small wooden cross carved by a novice. You learn that tokens of faith matter as much as stitched satchels of herbs. Each cross held in your hand promises divine protection on the journey home. The road back feels longer and colder than the road there. You learn that returning with cures and blessings weighs heavier than you expected. Your bundle of herbs hangs at your belt, and your new apothecary's tools rattle at your hip. You feel the eyes of other travelers on your laden back. At home, you prepare elderflower tea for your family and sprinkle yarrow leaves as you learned. The humble cottage fills with the steam and scent of hope. You learn that each act of care carries the memory of the journey and the courage it took to barter labor for relief. In the weeks that follow, your neighbors come to watch your ministrations. You distill mugwort and share your simple remedies. You learn that the bravest peasants were those who left hearth and home behind to find healing at distant monasteries. Their courage laid the groundwork for folk medicine passed down for generations. Shedding your shoes, you step into the damp grass beside the brook where the water trickles over pebbles. Your grandmother kneels and points to a cluster of broad leaves with purple undersides. It is comfrey, known to mend wounds and ease coughs. You learn to harvest only few leaves from each plant so it can regrow. You cut close to the stem and lay the leaves in your cloth bundle. A little farther on, she stops at a stand of elder trees. The blossoms hang in flattened clusters of tiny white flowers. You learn that an infusion of elderflowers can soothe fever and ease congestion in the chest. Your grandmother cautions that the berries and blossoms must be prepared correctly. You gather only the fresh blossoms and leave the green berries to ripen later. Each bloom feels soft between your fingers. Beyond the elder, you spy patches of mugwort growing at the edge of a barley field. The plant's silvery foliage gleams in the early light. You learn that mugwort has long been used to ease indigestion and to bring comfort in troubled sleep. Your grandmother clips several sprigs and bundles them together with string so they cannot tangle or break in the basket. As you pass an old oak, you notice a creeping ivy on its bark. Its small black berries and glossy leaves tempt you to pick them. Your grandmother shakes her head. Ivy is used only with great care to treat respiratory issues and must be mixed with other herbs. You learn that some plants can harm as well as heal if gathered without knowledge. At the foot of the oak, you find a patch of plantain. The broad leaves lie flat on the ground. You learn that chewed plantain leaves can draw out toxins from skin irritations and insect bites. Your grandmother splits a leaf and rubs it over a small scrape on your ankle. You feel a cool relief. You tuck several leaves into your basket. By midday, the sun climbs high and the hedgerow grows still. Your grandmother pauses and offers you a cup of water from her flask. You sip gratefully and learn that even when seeking herbs, you must guard against thirst and fatigue. Refreshed, you follow her to a damp hollow where water gathers in a shallow pool. Here grow marshmallow plants with thick white roots and fuzzy leaves. You learn that the root can be boiled to make a soothing syrup for sore throats. You dig carefully with your knife to unearth a few roots, then pat the soil closed so the plant may regrow. Nearby stands a patch of angelica with umbrella-like clusters of white flowers held high on hollow stems. You learn that angelica stalks and roots can be used to calm spasms in the stomach and to fortify the spirit against fear. You cut only a few stalks and trim the leaves, mindful that the plant is valuable and not everywhere plentiful. Your grandmother then guides you to a spot where wild thyme hugs the ground. Its tiny purple blooms release a perfume when crushed. You learn that thyme teaches courage to those who drink its tea, and that its antiseptic oils can help disinfect wounds. You rub a sprig between your palms and inhale deeply before placing it in your bundle. Next, you cross a stone wall into the next field. There, between the barley stalks, you find creeping buttercup. Your grandmother warns that this plant can irritate skin if applied directly. You learn that buttercup must be dried first before use in poultice to draw out poison from spider bites. You gather only a few sprigs for later drying. As afternoon light softens, you return toward the village, following a winding path that skirts the Pasadena churchyard. Your grandmother stops beside a headstone overgrown with ivy and dead nettle. Beneath the ivy, she finds a cluster of dead nettle with heart-shaped leaves and tiny white flowers. You learn that dead nettle can cool inflammation and ease painful swellings. You strip off the flowers and leaves and add them to the basket. Passing the church, you inhale the mingled scents of incense and smoke from the hearth fires. You learn that secular and sacred remedies often combine. Many of the herbs you gather will be blessed by the priest before use. Near the perimeter of the churchyard, you spot a few sprigs of yew. Your grandmother frowns and warns you to leave it be. You learn that yew is used only by skilled healers in minute doses to treat heart ailments. A single leaf can poison as easily as a vial of venom. You step carefully past its dark branches. As dusk approaches, you arrive back at the cottage with your laden basket, your grandmother, and you sort the herbs on a clean cloth. You tie yarrow, feverfew, and dead nettle into one bundle for tea. You stack comfrey and plantain in another pile for poultices. You lay elderflowers, angelica, and marshmallow roots on a drying rack by the window. You learn that proper drying preserves the active ingredients and prevents mold in the damp nights to come. You and your grandmother hang the bundles and roots in the loft where air circulates freely. You learn that knowledge of seasons, sunlight, and humidity shapes the success of every harvest. Without careful drying, the plants lose their potency, and your efforts go to waste. At the end of the day, you sit by the hearth as your grandmother prepares a simple decoction of yarrow and elderflower. You learn to sip the bitter tea slowly, feeling warmth spread through your limbs. She places a warm cloth on your forehead and hums an old lullaby. You learn that the act of gathering and preparing herbs is as much about comfort and community as it is about medicine. In the flickering firelight, you reflect on the day's lessons. You have learned to identify dozens of plants by sight and scent. You have learned to harvest gently, to respect the land, and to gather only what will be used wisely. You have learned that herbs are gifts of the earth that ease suffering and offer hope when death walks the lanes. As you drift to sleep in the cottage loft, you dream of green leaves under sky and of baskets heavy with healing power. You learn that in a time when no barber surgeon stands ready and no apothecary is near, this knowledge passes from generation to generation as the greatest safeguard against the Black Death's relentless tide. You awake before dawn to a still village where empty fields and silent cottages bear witness to loss and fear. Yet today you will learn how the community comes together to care for both the living and the dead, how neighbors support one another when disease strikes without mercy. You step into the common yard where a group of villagers gathers around the well. Their faces are drawn with worry and weariness, but they stand together in purpose. You learn that when plague swept through households, families alone could not cope with the numbers dying each day. Mutual aid became as vital as bread and firewood. An elder village man speaks in a low voice. He calls for volunteers to form a burial team. Their task will be to collect bodies from cottages, carry them to the mass grave on the hill, and bury them with simple rites. You learn that burying the dead quickly helps curb the spread of disease and honors the life that once was. A woman steps forward holding a plow blade fashioned into a crude shovel. Another brings mats, woven from reeds, to wrap bodies for carrying. You learn that tools for burial were improvised from farm implements and household crafts. Every villager drew on their own skills. Basket makers wove stretchers, coopers provided barrels for water to wash the dead, and blacksmiths fashioned tongs to handle bodies without touch. Before the team departs, the elder lays out a small store of vinegar, juniper berries, and cloth strips soaked in aromatic oils. He instructs the volunteers to rub vinegar on their hands and masks of cloth over their faces to guard against the stench and the sickness. You learn that although understanding of contagion was limited, peasants recognized that pungent smells and basic barriers offered some protection. The burial team moves in pairs along the muddy lanes. When they reach a cottage, they knock and wait. A family emerges with tears and bowed heads. They point toward the back room where the body lies. You watch as the volunteers enter with reverence and carry the deceased onto a reed mat. Their movements are careful and practiced. You learn that compassion guides their hands even when their hearts are heavy. Once the body is secured, they lift it onto shoulders and walk in solemn procession toward the village boundary. Crops sway in the morning breeze, and birds watch in quiet curiosity. You learn that the sight of the burial team summoned both dread and relief in villagers who saw them pass. It meant another life lost, but also that the community would not leave the dead to lie unburied. At the mass gravesite on the hill, the team gently lowers each mat and removes the body. One volunteer carries a small wooden cross to mark the spot, while another sprinkles earth mixed with lavender blossoms over the coffin. You learn that lavender and rosemary grew in every cottage garden for their pleasant scent and believed healing power. Their blossoms gave the dead one last touch of care. After each burial, the team returns to the village, washing tools in a trough of hot water mixed with ash and vinegar. You learn that this ritual cleaning prepared them for the next task and prevented accidental spread of illness. It was a primitive form of sanitation born of necessity. Meanwhile, in the village center, a simple shelter offers care for the sick. You enter a thatched hut where straw beds line the walls. A handful of women tend the feverish. They feed broth sweetened with honey and place poultices of comfrey and yarrow on swollen limbs. You learn that peasants relied on folk remedies passed down by mothers and midwives. These treatments could not cure the plague but helped ease suffering. A midwife teaches apprentices how to boil water over a fire and steam aromatic herbs above the patient's head. She warns that too much heat can scorch the skin and that the patient must breathe deeply for the vapors to work. You learn that steam and scent were the closest peasants came to medicine in that age. Outside the hut, a volunteer digs a trench for waste and water runoff. He covers it with bark to keep flies at bay. You learn that basic latrine construction reduced the filth and odors that drew vermin and spread disease. Even rudimentary steps could make a difference in village hygiene. As midday sun rises, the burial team returns with new tools and stories of each household. They share what they learned of the last hours of the dying, words of forgiveness, brief prayers, the prayers, final grasp of a child's hand. You learn that telling these stories in the common yard helped villagers bear collective grief and remember those lost. In the afternoon, a wandering herbalist arrives at the shelter. He offers tinctures made from willow bark and great must. He trades these in exchange for eggs and cheese. You learn that barter networks sprang up, linking villages across miles. Through these exchanges, peasants gained access to rarer plants and learned new remedies from each other. At dusk, the burial team gathers again at the shelter. They share a meal of porridge and salted fish. Their voices are tired but steady. They speak of the day's labor and the next round of homes to visit. You learn that community care required organization and rotation so no one burned out under the relentless toll of death. After supper, a village elder rings a small bell to call all able-bodied to an evening meeting. They sit in a circle beneath an oak tree. A scribe records names of those willing to help with future tasks, baking bread for the sick, tending livestock for quarantined families, gathering firewood. You learn that peasant mutual aid extended beyond burial and healing into every corner of daily life. One volunteer suggests setting aside field rows for growing medicinal herbs next season. Another proposes gathering frogs and leeches to support more advanced treatments. They learn from friars who passed through on pilgrimage. You learn that peasants adapted fresh ideas from travelers and blended them into local practice. As night falls, you return to your cottage. You light a small lamp and sit before a shelf of dried herbs and clay jars. You hold a sprig of rosemary and recall the day's work. You learn that community care was not only a matter of life and death, but of hope and human connection. In the darkness, you pray for the souls of the departed and for the strength to rise again at dawn. You learn that though the Black Death was a time of terror and loss, it also forged bonds of solidarity and gave birth to the first forms of shared healthcare and sanitation. You drift to sleep with the knowledge that survival in that age depended on more than prayers or potions. It depended on the willingness of peasants to stand with one another, in fields and cottages, in shelters and at grave sites. Through every act of care and burial, they created the roots of a healthier future for all. You step through the shattered gate of your village at dawn, your heart pounding with fear and determination. Behind you lie cottages shuttered against plague and fields left fallow. Ahead stretches the dark line of forest where you hope to find refuge. You learn that in times of terror, some peasants chose the woods over the walls of their homes, trusting roots and rainwater to sustain them when disease stalked the lanes. Under the dense canopy, you feel the air grow cooler and the lights soften. The path is overgrown with bramble and fern. You learn to move quietly so that the sound of your footsteps does not echo like a trumpet through the silent trees. Each step carries you away from dying bells and into a world where hunger may stalk you more fiercely than any illness. You pause to gather your senses and examine the small bundle at your back. Inside lie a clay cup, a small knife you borrowed from the village butcher, and a few linen rags to strain water. No bread remains in your pouch. You learned that every item must earn its keep in the forest. A heavy burden can slow you to weakness in days without fire or hearth. Your first task is water. You follow the trickle of a hidden stream, its flow muffled by moss and fallen leaves. You bring the clay cup to your lips and sip the cold water. No silver coin glints beneath this surface, but you trust the clear flow more than any well fouled by fear. You learn that rainwater puddles in tree hollows and rock crevices can fill your flask when no stream runs nearby. Beneath a mass of litter, you glimpse the bright green of stinging nettle. You learn that once boiled, this plant offers nourishment and vitamins. You wrap a rag around the stem and pull it free without touching the leaves. Later, you will simmer them into a broth to calm hunger and strengthen aching limbs. Further on, you spy wild garlic under oaks. The scent reaches you before you see the leaves. You learn that garlic bulbs can both flavor food and help stave off infection. You dig gently with your knife around the base until you free a small cluster of bulbs. You wipe them on your sleeve and slip them into your pouch, knowing they must be used sparingly to last until you reach safer ground. As midday approaches, the forest grows quiet and oppressive. You find a fallen log and rest upon its rough surface. You draw deep breaths of pine and damp earth. You learn that rest is as vital as foraging. A moment of calm builds strength for the day's next tasks. Yet you cannot linger too long. Even in forest, the risk of wild animals and of lonely despair awaits those who tarry. Rising again, you search for edible roots. You recall the taste of burdock and horseradish that your grandmother taught you to recognize. You locate a small taproot peeking through the soil. You yank it free and slice off a thin piece with your knife to taste. Its bitterness confirms its identity. You learned that roasting small roots over embers yields starch and flavor enough to stave off faintness. Ahead, the forest opens into a clearing dotted with berry bushes. You find ripe blackberries in thick clusters. You learn that gathering berries at dawn avoids the heat of midday and yields the sweetest fruit. You fill your empty cup and eat hungrily. The burst of juice brings a moment of joy amid uncertainty. You gather more in leaves and press them into a small cloth bundle for later. As afternoon light wanes, you seek shelter. You find a shallow cave under a rocky ledge. The floor is dry and flat. You clear away loose stones and leaves to form a bed of moss and pine needles. You learn that even a simple shelter can protect you from wind and rain, and from the eyes of strangers who might drag you back to plague gates. Before night falls, you build a small fire of dry twigs and moss. Sparks catch and lamp-like embers glow beneath logs. You roast small pieces of root and toss in dried nettle for flavor. You sip rainwater warmed by the flames. You learned that fire offers warmth and safety, and that tending it through the night keeps wolves and worse at bay. In the dark, you press the garlic bulbs into the flames one by one. Their scent curls through the camp and keeps insects away. You learn that smoke and scent become tools of survival in the wilderness. You wrap a piece of cloth around your head and tie it under your chin to guard against both insects and inhaled chills. As you lie beneath the cave roof, you listen to the quiet rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. You think of your cottage and of the herbs you left behind. You learned that exile in the forest carries its own perils, yet offers a chance to evade the sickness that stalks villages. Only those desperate or daring enough could choose this flight to the trees. You close your eyes and feel the weight of the forest pressing in. No plague doctor's mask shields you here. Your protection lies in knowledge of earth and sky, in courage born of hunger and fear. You learn that survival demands both humility and resolve. And in that silent night, you vow to greet the dawn with renewed hope and the will to endure another day away from home. In the grip of fear, peasants turned suspicion into action and sought someone to blame for the terrible sickness ravaging their villages. Rumors spread faster than the disease itself and pointed fingers at outsiders in their midst. Anyone who looked or behaved differently became suspect. Many believed the plague arrived on poisoned wells or foul air deliberately unleashed by malice. Neighbors whispered that wandering beggars carried the sickness and fled before it struck. They barred travelers from their gates and drove away those in tattered clothes. You learned that survival sometimes meant closing your heart and doors to anyone who might bring doom. Jews suffered the worst of these accusations. In market towns, clergy preached that they had poisoned holy springs to harm Christians. Angry mobs gathered beneath synagogue walls, chanting for justice. Despite pleas from local lords and the crown, the violence swept across the countryside. Men, women, and children were dragged from their homes and thrown into rivers or torches. You learned that in times of terror, hatred found fertile ground and took root in violence. Lepers and the infirm became another target. Forced into separate quarters along the town walls, they carried bells to warn of their approach. Yet when fear peaked, villagers stormed the leper houses with torches and drove the sick out to die alone on the edge of the woods. You learned that communal care collapsed under dread and that the most vulnerable paid with their lives. In some regions, wandering pilgrims hiding from disease were blamed. They bore badges from distant shrines or pockets full of herbs. The sight of their holy symbols did not save them from stoning. You learned that symbols once seen as protection could become proof of conspiracy in the fevered mind of a terrified crowd. Scapegoating rose not only from superstition but from desperate logic. Food stores dwindled and each mouth seemed one mouth too many. Accused families lost their right to harvest fields or draw water. Landlords seized their property and neighbors claimed their cottages. You learned that economic strain mixed with fear to fuel persecution. Blame brought a twisted relief that misfortune had been caused by someone else's sin. Church leaders sometimes fanned flames of accusation. They preached that sin invited God's wrath in the form of plague. Confession and penance could save the faithful, but only if sacrilege was rooted out. Accusations of heresy and sorcery were thus as dangerous as any plague. You learned that religion could offer hope, while also unleashing violence against supposed sinners. In village squares, makeshift courts tried the accused. Trials lacked evidence and offered no chance for defense. A sniff of suspicion could seal one's fate. You learned that law gave way to mob rule when terror ruled the heart of every man, woman, and child. Reason slipped from memory, and vengeance took its place. Some peasants found safety in unity against a common enemy. They formed vigilante bands to patrol borders and report strangers. Watchfires blazed on hilltops as signals of danger or of capture. Villagers kept lists of suspicious names and passed them from one cottage to the next. You learned that solidarity in persecution felt like solidarity at last. In blaming someone else, they felt a measure of control restored. Not all turned to violence. A few peasants refused to join hunts for scapegoats. They hid travelers and cared for the sick regardless of origin. These brave souls risked their own lives to offer refuge and comfort. Some were saved by the very people they protected when order returned, and grateful survivors fought back against the persecution of innocents. You learned that compassion could withstand terror when grounded in courage. As the death toll fell and fields lay empty again, survivors looked back on the fury of those months. Charred homes of Jews and lepers stood as ghastly monuments to the power of fear. Testimonies recorded regret and shame. Some village councils issued apologies or offered restitution to a few who had escaped. You learned that healing required truth, and that facing the horror of scapegoating was the first step toward rebuilding trust. When the plague receded, some communities took steps to prevent such violence again. They passed local ordinances, forbidding mobs and requiring trials under proper law. They rebuilt leper houses as infirmaries and welcomed pilgrims once more. You learned that experience forced change and that the price of scapegoating could never be forgotten. In tale and song, the bloodthirsty mobs faded into mythic villainy. The scapegoats themselves became figures of tragic memory. You learned that history remembers both the cruelty of accusation and the courage of compassion. In your own village, you walked among the fields once sown by those driven away. You saw new families planting seeds where old cottages had burned. You learned that life endures, but that the scars of scapegoating run deep in the soil and in the hearts of survivors. Surviving the Black Death meant more than escaping fever. It meant surviving the cruelty of blame. It meant learning that fear could turn neighbor against neighbor, and that only by remembering these horrors could a village guard against repeating them. You learned that the search for blame may offer false comfort, but that true survival depends on solidarity and mercy, even in the darkest of times. The last bells of the plague have fallen silent, and at sunrise you step out of your ruined cottage into a world both empty and full of promise. You learn that rebuilding lives will begin in the fields. Your family tended for generations before sickness stole your kin. Today, you return to the furrowed land and the half-collapsed walls to bring back the work that once sustained you. First, you join your neighbors in clearing the hedgerows and filling in ditches that overflowed. During your absence, trees that grew tall in weeks stand where wheat once waved. You grasp an iron hoe and strike at bramble and nettle alike. Each pull removes another barrier between you and the soil beneath. You learn that reclaiming fields is a test of endurance and hope. Every shovelful of earth turned reminds you of the hands that must plant seed for new life to flourish. When woodland encroaches too deeply, you bring out the heavy wedges and mallets. A dozen men edge beneath the shade of ancient oaks and drive wedges into the thick trunks. You learn to listen for the crack of wood as it splits. Each tree felled opens light onto soil rich with leaf, mold, and ready for plowing. Throughout the land, Such work becomes the first wave of recovery. Villagers gather around each stump to share water and bread and to speak of spring hopes. Between labored breaths, once the scrub is pushed back, you gather to repair the ancient ridge and furrow. You learn that before the plague, peasants rotated crops in a 3-field rotation, planting barley, then beans, then leaving land fallow. Now, with fewer mouths to feed but more hands to work, some fields lie empty while others strain under seeds of wheat and oats. You walk the lines planting bean seed in drills, knowing that legumes fix nitrogen in the soil and speed its return to fertility. Each seed dropped into earth brings a promise of grain and of soil turned rich again. Next, you repair the fences and ditches that once kept animals within bounds. Sheep and cattle roam nearby meadows freed of watchful shepherds. You and a handful of neighbors weave hazel rods into wattle fences or set upright posts to carry woven branches. You drive hazel stakes deep into soil, still soft from spring rains. You learn that every fence you raise reclaims a boundary. Every gate you hinge remembers a shared pasture. These boundaries become the lines between order and wilderness in the new world you are rebuilding. At midday, you gather in the churchyard courtyard. The priest blesses each plowshare before it leaves the blacksmith's forge. The smith stands with his hammer at rest while villagers come forward to claim 1 plowshare apiece. You learn that these metal blades must cut through deeper soil than ever imagined. With plague lost, the old grass thatch and turf now harden the ground. A sharp plowshare turns under oxen yoke and reveals dark earth ready to feed another generation. In the afternoon, long trains of oxen walk back and forth across the fields. You ride atop a loaded cart of new seed, your cloak flapping in the breeze. You learn that bartered seed and shared labor unite communities. No single peasant holds all the means to recovery. Instead, every field becomes a testament to cooperation. When one family lacks seed, another shares grain from their granary in exchange for labor at harvest. These exchanges rebuild both harvest and trust. As evening falls, you return to your home. The roof is patched with fresh reed thatch, and the wattle walls bear a coat of clay mixed with straw. Children hang lanterns from crossbeams, and the smell of stew drifts from the hearth. You learn that rebuilding lives means reclaiming your hearth as well as your fields. Every beam you replace, and every wall you seal, brings comfort after so many nights of fear. Over the following weeks, new tools spread through the villages. The heavy moldboard plough makes its way from one manor to another, turning deeper earth than the old scratch plough could manage. You learn that this new plough breaks sod faster and buries weeds more thoroughly, giving roots less chance to return. Between fields, you share a single plough and a pair of oxen, so that even the poorest family can break ground in time for planting. You also hear of seed drills used by forward-thinking farmers in distant towns. These wooden drills plant seeds at regular intervals, saving labor and yielding more even crop stands. Though rare, these tools give hope for better yields in years to come. You learn that rebuilding lives includes embracing innovations beyond the old customs, blending tradition with new ideas to withstand future trials. At harvest, you stand once more in the golden waves of ripened grain. Scythes ring against each other as neighbors gather to reap what you sowed together. You learn that this first harvest after the plague tastes of more than barley and wheat. It tastes of sweat, of shared labor, and of the faith that life endures beyond any darkness. You fill woven baskets with oats for the miller and barley for the brewer. Beans you shelve in the granary for winter. Each load you carry promises bread for your family and ale for the village festival to come. You learn that rebuilding lives means reclaiming not only food but joy, laughter, and celebration after long months of mourning. When you lay your head down that night, your body aches in a way that testifies to honest work. You feel the ache of muscles that reclaimed fields, mended homes, and grafted new hope onto old roots. You learn that survival of the Black Death required more than luck. It demanded courage, community, and the willingness to learn how to coax life from land that once seemed lost forever. You return to the fields where the sick once lay in loose graves beneath the hedgerows. The plague has passed, but its shadow lingers in every cleared field and in every changed custom. You learn that the dead have taught the living lessons that reshaped your world and set the course of medicine for generations to come. In the months after the last fever broke, the village saw fewer hands to till the soil. You and your neighbors who survived faced a new reality. Lords could no longer demand endless labor because too many peasants had perished. You learned that scarcity of labor gave you new bargaining power. Where before you worked from sun to dusk without rest or reward, now you could demand fair wages for each day's toil. The feudal order shifted as peasants won the right to leave their manor or to keep part of the harvest for themselves. New rules replaced the old customs. You learned to keep written records of agreements rather than trust only spoken promise. From the church clerk, you borrowed parchment and ink and marked down your name beside the lord's, noting the number of days to be worked and the pay due. You learned that a simple sheet of paper could protect you from unfair demands, and that words on a page carried more weight than any rumor. Beyond labor, you observed changes in diet and hygiene. Before the plague, people seldom washed more than once a week, and clothes went uncleaned for months. Now families who survived adopted daily bathing in the river or in wooden tubs heated by embers. You learned that warmth and soap made life cheaper than you had ever known. In kitchens, you hung fresh herbs from the rafters, not only to flavor soups, but to drive away the stench of sickness. Fennel, rue, and lavender became staples not only of cure, but of daily life. Burial customs changed as well. Mass graves gave way to individual plots in consecrated churchyards. You learned that careful burial with prayers and markers honored the dead and reassured the living that each soul had rest. Parish records began to list names and dates of death so you could trace your own family's losses. You learned that counting the dead taught you how to guard the living. The church responded with new institutions. Monasteries and hospitals opened infirmaries where the poor could receive care. You saw monks mixing vinegar and wine into poultices and ordering hands washed between patients. You learned that cleanliness mattered as much as faith, and that caring for the sick required organized places rather than bedside remedies alone. In nearby towns, you heard of master physicians from the universities who collected reports of plague symptoms. They tallied cases of buboes and fevers and published their findings in manuscripts for other doctors to read. You learned that medicine was becoming a science of observation rather than only a craft passed from father to son. The notes and drawings of swellings and wound dressings formed the seeds of modern medical textbooks. Apothecaries began to distill essential oils and to weight doses of herbs on small scales. You saw jars of powdered bark lined on shelves and vials of scented waters, labeled for fever or infection. You learned that measuring each pinch of herb brought more consistent results than guessing by sight or feel. This practice of weighing ingredients marked the birth of pharmacology. Local healers who once relied only on tradition now studied the books brought by wandering scholars. They learned to prepare syrups of elderflower and decoctions of willow bark. You learned that many remedies once thought superstition could ease pain and reduce inflammation when prepared correctly. Knowledge passed from learned doctors to village-wise women, and then back again, created a new network of healing. Public health measures emerged as ordinary folk saw the value of preventing contagion. You learned to keep the streets swept of refuse and to draw water from fresh springs rather than stagnant ponds. During summers, you hung signs at the village entrance warning travelers to report illness immediately. A volunteer watch collected bodies daily and carried them out of sight so that the living would not be exposed. These simple steps taught the principle of quarantine long before any scholar wrote about it. Guilds formed to support members who fell sick. bakers and carpenters levied a small fee on each member's earnings. When disease struck one of their own, the guild paid for medicine and food. You learned that collective insurance kept families from destitution and that pooling resources protected community health. Out of necessity, new markets opened for food and firewood. You saw merchants travel farther to buy grain and to bring in spices believed to ward off plague. You learned that trade networks revived to meet the demand for goods that kept people alive. Towns began to charge a toll on wagons carrying salt or charcoal and used the revenue to maintain clean wells and to hire a town crier to announce public health directives. Above all, you learned that nothing could replace observation and record keeping. When someone fell ill, you noted the day, the symptoms, and any household remedies tried. Neighbors compared notes and found patterns in who survived and who did not. Over time, you came to recognize warning signs and to isolate the sick before the fever spread. This informal epidemiology among peasants laid the groundwork for the public health agencies that would emerge centuries later. You also learned humility. The plague taught that no amount of prayer or ritual alone could halt disease. You combined faith with medicine, invoking saints as you applied poultices. You prayed over tinctures of rue as you fed them to the fevered. You learned that hope and healing walked hand in hand. In the years that followed, you saw the village rebuilt and the fields restocked with cattle and seed. You welcomed new neighbors whose families had survived in distant towns. You exchanged farming methods and shared seeds for hardier crops. You learned that cooperation replaced suspicion, and that out of tragedy came resilience stronger than before. In your old age, you told your grandchildren of the dark days when death moved like a silent army through cottage and chapel. You showed them the parchments where you first wrote down your agreement with the Lord, and where you recorded the names of each lost neighbor. You taught them how to press yarrow leaves into book pages for future generations to see. You learned that the Black Death did more than kill, it transformed the very fabric of peasant life. It loosened the chains of feudal labor. It sparked the first steps toward scientific medicine, and it wove new threads of community care. The lessons from the dead became the foundations of modern society. As dusk falls, you light a candle in the ruined church tower and pause in gratitude for every harvest and every cure learned by trial and by loss. You learned that the greatest tribute to the dead is the wisdom they leave behind. Each life honored in memory becomes a seed of knowledge for the living.